The door clicked shut at 9:50 p.m. Inside the Tucson warmth, 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie set her alarm, unaware that the air around her was already thinning. By dawn, the house was a hollow shell. No broken glass, no struggle, just an impossible silence. She hadn't just walked out. She had been pulled into a void that modern technology couldn't see. The world woke up to a nightmare, wondering how a grandmother could vanish into a tunnel of shadows. The blind spot. The tunnel wasn't built from brick, mortar, or the hardened Arizona caliche. It was an architecture of intent, a psychological and digital corridor constructed long before the first foot ever stepped onto Nancy's property. In the high desert quiet of Tucson, the tunnel became the only way to describe the impossible vacuum that swallowed an 84-year-old woman whole. It was the ultimate blind spot in a world that prides itself on being hyper-observed. We live in an era where we believe every inch of our lives is mapped, tracked, and uploaded. Yet Nancy Guthrie walked into a darkness that the digital grid simply couldn't account for. To the FBI, this tunnel was a sequence of deliberate, dark zones. Imagine a neighborhood where every home is a fortress of ring cameras, nest sensors, and smart locks. Now, imagine a predator who maps those overlapping fields of vision like a sonar operator. They found the one path where the infrared beams didn't cross, the one fence line where the neighbor's floodlight died, and the exact 100-minute window where the digital grid flickered. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a subterranean crawl through the habits of a grandmother. It was a masterpiece of cold, calculated isolation, designed to bypass the very technology we trust to keep us safe. The shock that eventually rippled outward wasn't about a hidden room under a basement floor or a physical passage through the dirt. It was the realization of how deeply the predator had tunneled into Nancy's private reality. They knew the 9:50 p.m. click of the deadbolt. They knew the specific frequency to jam the Wi-Fi signal at 1:47 a.m., causing the cameras to blink just long enough for a shadow to pass. This was a structural failure of safety. We build our lives around the idea that we are seen, but the tunnel proved that if someone studies the light long enough, they can master the dark. They don't need to break a window if they can break the signal. Inside this metaphorical tunnel, Nancy Guthrie wasn't just a victim. She was a ghost in a machine that had been hacked. The kidnapper didn't need a shovel to bury the truth. They used the tunnel of encrypted apps and burner signals to move her through the city like a whisper. When the FBI finally opened this tunnel, they didn't find a physical passage with a door. They found a chillingly professional blueprint of a life dismantled from the inside out. They found a predator who didn't just break into a house. They tunneled into a soul, learning the rhythm of her heart and the silence of her street. The public wanted a secret passage because a physical tunnel can be filled with concrete. It can be closed, mapped, and understood. But the tunnel the FBI actually uncovered was a haunting reminder that the most dangerous paths are the ones we can't see until we're already inside them. It was the space between the good night text and the morning's empty bed. It was a void where the rules of physics seemed to bend, allowing a person to evaporate. By the time the investigation began, the tunnel was already collapsing behind them, leaving the authorities to sift through the digital dust of a ghost. This was the secret they finally opened. It wasn't a hole in the ground. It was a hole in the American dream of security. It was the discovery that no matter how many locks we turn or how many cameras we install, there are those who know how to walk beneath the floorboards of our perception. Nancy didn't just vanish. She was archived. Now to understand the tunnel, we have to look at the woman who was forced into it. She's too old to be lost, actually. The midnight disconnect. Nancy was a creature of comfort and clockwork. At 84, her life was a series of gentle, predictable rhythms that anchored her to the world. She liked her tea at 7, her news at 8, and her doors locked by 9. To those who knew her, she was the steady heartbeat of a family that lived under the relentless glare of the public eye. But on the night of February 1, 2026, that rhythm was hijacked. The disconnect didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, surgical dismantling of her presence. It started with the garage door, a heavy mechanical yawn that closed at 9:50 p.m., sealing her inside what she believed was a sanctuary. By 10:30 p.m., the interior lights of the Tucson home dimmed. Nancy was a woman who prepared for tomorrow. Her outfit for the next day was likely already laid out, her glasses resting on the nightstand. She was the picture of a quiet American life, yet she was being watched through a lens she couldn't see. The disconnect became literal at 1:47 a.m. This is the moment the investigation centers on, the moment the digital pulse of the house flatlined. The Wi-Fi router, the silent guardian of the modern home, experienced a localized blackout. It wasn't a power failure. It was a signal jam, a deliberate severance of the house from the cloud. When the connection dropped, the house became an island. The doorbell camera, which had spent the night staring blankly at the desert scrub, went blind. The motion sensors in the hallway ceased to report. In that artificial darkness, the predator moved. They didn't need to force a window, they had already tunneled through the security codes, likely obtained through a sophisticated phishing scheme or a man-in-the-middle attack on the home's network. Nancy, likely asleep, never heard the phantom footsteps. She was a woman who trusted the world, living in a house that had been programmed to betray her. The physical disappearance was as clean as the digital one. There was no sign of a struggle in the bedroom, no overturned lamp, no blood on the sheets. It was as if she had simply evaporated. The kidnapper didn't just take a person, they took a timeline. By the time her family realized she was missing the next morning, the trail was already cold. The midnight disconnect had provided a 6-hour head start. In that window, the predator had navigated her through the tunnel of side streets and unmonitored alleys, moving with a confidence that suggested they had rehearsed this exit 1,000 times in their mind. What makes this part of the mystery so haunting is the mundane nature of the evidence left behind. A half-empty glass of water. A book with a bookmark halfway through a chapter. These are the artifacts of a life interrupted. The FBI technicians who swarmed the house days later found themselves looking at a crime scene that felt more like a stage set where the lead actress had simply walked off script. The disconnect wasn't just technical. It was emotional. It was the moment the safety net of a prominent family was proven to be made of glass. As the sun rose over the Santa Catalina Mountains on February 2nd, the world still thought Nancy Guthrie was waking up to her morning tea. In reality, she was already deep within the void. The predator had successfully transitioned her from a living person to a case file. They had bypassed the cameras, the locks, and the community's watchful eyes. They had turned a home into a vacuum. The house was empty, but it wasn't silent. It was screaming with digital footprints. The FBI steps into the dark. When the FBI's Phoenix field office descended upon the Catalina foothills, they didn't just bring badges. They brought a clinical, cold-eyed methodology designed to dissect a disappearance. By the morning of February 2nd, the quiet, hilly neighborhood was no longer a retirement haven. It was a high-stakes forensic laboratory. The agents who stepped through Nancy Guthrie's front door were entering a crime scene that defied traditional logic. There was no shattered glass, no mud-tracked carpet, and no obvious sign of a struggle. Instead, there was something much more unsettling, a series of calculated absences. The federal response was immediate and massive. While the Pima County Sheriff's Department handled the local perimeter, the Bureau's Evidence Response Team, ERT, began the painstaking process of lighting up the tunnel the predator had used. They weren't just looking for fingerprints, they were hunting for the invisible. Technicians deployed signal sniffers to sweep the property, attempting to find any lingering trace of the jamming device that had severed the home's Wi-Fi at 1:47 a.m. They were looking for a digital shadow left behind by the intruder's own equipment. In the modern age, a kidnapper's greatest weapon is their tech, but that same tech often leaves a microscopic breadcrumb trail of pings and handshakes with local cell towers. As the days bled into weeks, the investigation moved from the bedroom to the desert scrub. The FBI's search and rescue teams, bolstered by U.S. Customs and Border Protection drones and K-9 units, began a grid search that felt more like an archaeological dig. They weren't just looking for Nancy. They were looking for the Black Ozark Trail backpack, a 25-liter hiker pack sold exclusively at Walmart, that the masked intruder had been seen wearing in the brief, dying moments of the doorbell camera's life. This backpack became a focal point of the federal hunt. It was a common item, a piece of mass-market utility, yet in the context of the desert, it was a beacon of potential DNA. Then came the discovery that shifted the energy of the entire operation. Roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home, in a field near a dusty roadside, a search team recovered a black glove. It wasn't just any glove, it appeared to match the pair worn by the armed individual captured on the Nest camera. The forensic tension in the FBI's Quantico lab reached a fever pitch as they extracted a DNA profile of an unidentified male from the fabric. This was the smoking gun the public had been clamoring for, a physical piece of the predator. But the shock the world felt when the FBI opened this lead was the shock of a dead end. The profile was run through CODIS, the national database of millions of offenders, and it returned nothing. This is where the FBI's work enters the realm of the dark. When the database fails, the investigators have to turn to more creative, often controversial, methods. They began looking into investigative genetic genealogy, the same tool used to catch the Golden State Killer, searching commercial databases like Ancestry and 23andMe for a distant cousin, a sibling, or a father of the man who left his skin cells on that glove. They were trying to build a family tree for a ghost. Meanwhile, specialists from the FBI's Operational Technology Division worked to bypass the no-subscription hurdle of Nancy's security system, hoping that even without a cloud backup, the local hardware might have cached a few more frames of the intruder's face. The pressure on the agents was suffocating. This wasn't just any missing person case. This was the mother of a national icon, Savannah Guthrie. Every lead was scrutinized by a global audience. When bloodstains were found near the entrance of the home, the lab worked around the clock to confirm it was Nancy's. It was. The realization that she had been injured before being taken added a layer of frantic urgency to the hunt. She was 84, she had a pacemaker, and she was without her daily heart medication. The FBI wasn't just looking for a kidnapper. They were racing against a biological clock. By late February, the FBI began a final sweep of the residence. They had analyzed over 23,000 tips. They had reviewed footage from every Walmart in the Southwest that had sold an Ozark Trail backpack in the last 6 months. They had mapped every tunnel of escape the predator could have taken through the Catalina foothills. The house, once a sanctuary, was now a hollowed-out shell of evidence bags and luminol traces. The FBI had stepped into the dark, and what they found was a predator who didn't just understand the law, they understood the silence of the desert. Even with the best tech in the world, the most chilling evidence came from a piece of paper. The ransom and the rabbit hole. When the first ransom note arrived, it didn't come through a clandestine drop-off or a muffled phone call in the middle of the night. It arrived as a digital intrusion, sliding into the inboxes of major media outlets like TMZ and local Arizona news stations. This was the first time the world truly saw the depth of the tunnel. The kidnappers weren't just hiding in the physical desert. They were operating from the high ground of the digital age. They demanded $6 million in Bitcoin, a figure so specific and staggering that it signaled a predator who had calculated the exact price of a national icon's peace of mind. The notes were chillingly clinical. They didn't use the frantic, cut-out magazine letter tropes of the past. Instead, they were written with a cold, terrifying authority.